It turns out systemic racism was the real Candy all along. Candy with a razor blade. Of police.
You are not content with the stories, so I was obliged to come. Be my victim.
You know, the original plan for this was that I was going to play Halo so that I would be more distracted, so that I wouldn't talk as much, so that Xavier could talk
Looks
more.
like you'll have to just exercise some self-control instead. I'm very sorry about that.
Well, I'm very sorry about that, but that's impossible.
What are you, Candyman? It's Tony Todd, who keeps sleeping on my couch and won't leave.
So would you like to tell the audience what movies we watched today?
Today we watched Candyman, about a ghost who was killed by racism, who appears when you say his name 5 times in the mirror, like a Bloody Mary with less steps. It doesn't have to be at night. It really just has to be in a mirror. And so he appears and uses his crazy hook hand to blow you up.
As revenge for systemic racism.
As revenge for the racism.
Be my victim.
We watched Candyman, and this is a double feature of 2 different horror films. We watched Candyman, and then we watched Candyman.
I am the writing on the wall. The sweet smell of blood. Be my victim.
It would be really nice if we lived in a world without systemic racism that also made sure to number sequels correctly so that they would not be difficult to Google for people who want to research movies. Hey, what are you watching?
Hey,
He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. Which one? There's 4 cartoons with that title.
So what did you like better? Did you like Candyman or Candyman?
I like Candyman more.
I don't know. That seems a bit... That's a bold claim. I always think that Candyman... It has to be better.
No, Candyman was way better.
What are you talking about? Candyman was way better.
Well, because Candyman had Tony Todd.
Yeah, that's true. But
And,
Candyman also has Tony Todd.
Well, yeah, but, like, the other one, Tony Todd's cooler than the other one.
Yeah.
Because he shows up and he's like...
And he has bees in his mouth.
And he has bees in his mouth in that one. And that's way cooler.
I see where you're going with that, but I still think Candyman is better.
I don't know. Agree to disagree.
It's
Candyman, of the 2, Candyman is my favorite.
Of the 2, I think that Candyman falls a little bit short on some elements, like the portrayal of Candyman. So I thought that Candyman, because of their superior portrayal of Candyman, was a little bit superior of the Candyman.
I like the one with the white people in the main room. But no, both of them are great films. I feel like they're very good companion pieces. It's kind of hard to pick a favorite between them because one exists very well because of the other. They inform one another.
So
it's like 2 chapters of a single story.
So Candyman is based on a short story by regular on our channel and living legend Clive Barker, who wrote a story called The Man, the Myth, the Legend, who wrote a story in his books of blood called The Forbidden, and that was adapted by English film director Bernard Rose, who had the idea to transpose it from a story about working class neighborhoods in England in Liverpool to make it about housing projects in Chicago with the majority of black residents. And then there were 2 sequels,
which we did not see,
called Candyman Farewell to the Flesh and Candyman Day of the Dead. And those...
Really? That's the title? Was Tony Todd in them?
I believe he was.
Okay. Well, I mean, he's so synonymous with that character that if you have Candyman in any capacity, it has to be him.
And
at least a little.
It's like saying you would make a Hellraiser movie without Clive Barker. Or without
Doug Bradley.
Which
they did twice, and those were miserable.
I was going to make a joke saying, like... And of course, we all know that nobody would be stupid enough to do that. But then you ruined it for me. Fuck you.
Well, you can just edit... Just cut to a different angle of you saying the thing. Just say it.
It's like saying you would make a Hellraiser movie without Clive Barker. Or without
Doug Bradley.
And of course, nobody would be stupid enough to do that.
See, there you go. You got your joke.
So would you like to talk about the first movie that we watched?
When did it come out? 1990 what? 1992. Candyman is the story of a journalist in training grad student.
No, it's not a journalist in training. It's a PhD student who's studying folklore.
A PhD student who's studying being a nosy bitch.
Basically.
And so... She goes to a neighborhood in Chicago called
Cabrini
Green to investigate a local legend because everyone in this community...
In this neighborhood.
Housing
projects.
Yeah. In this low-income housing area seem to attribute basically every horrible thing that happens within this community to the legend of Candyman, who is apparently a son of a slave from the 1890s who was killed for having a romantic affair with a white woman. He was tortured, had his hand chopped off and replaced with a hook, and then he was stung to death by bees and then set on fire. And so his spirit still roams this general area,
which is where he died.
And anytime someone says his sort of moniker in a mirror 3 times or 5 times, and then he'll appear and he'll get you hooked on phonics.
And then, as this happens, it is revealed that Candyman has a interest in this woman named Helen Lyle. Special interest. He wants her for his own
nefarious purposes of an unsavory nature.
But of course, because it's Tony Todd, he does it
in a really classy, interesting
alluring way.
He's much like Pinhead from Clive Barker's other more famous story.
Most famous.
He's very eloquent in his scariness. He's not blunt or crude in any way.
Helen, I came for you.
Basically, the whole movie is sort of this slow sort of seduction of her, or at least an attempted seduction.
He essentially wants her to die so she can be another legend with him and be like his ghost girlfriend who can haunt people with him.
And it's revealed at the end of the movie that she may or may not be the reincarnation
of the white woman that he died after falling in love with.
Mm-hmm. Of the white woman that he fell in love with that caused his death.
Yeah. Which is the source of his obsession. And so throughout the movie, he this vengeful spirit of Candyman commits various atrocities
surrounding her,
and basically pins it on her to put her in this box where her life is so over from every possible standpoint that she has no choice but to give in to him.
And also because she is a skeptic and she doesn't believe in his story, and her actions to get other people to think the way that she does is putting his existence
in jeopardy.
Because
in order to exist, he has to be a legend. As long as people
believe in him.
As long as people keep telling the story of Candyman and keeping him alive through their fear of him, he will always exist. And so if people no longer believe in him, he will disappear. And that's another reason he has to come after her.
So basically, he's a god from American Gods.
He's a murdery Santa Claus.
Are you saying he's Tim Allen?
Can you imagine Tim Allen with a hook hand and he teleports in behind you? It's a really good movie. It has a lot of very interesting imagery, very creepy, very slow burn, I would say, in its horror. It doesn't have a ton of scenes of people just getting slashed to pieces and spooky stuff. It really takes its time ramping up the tension, and for like Candyman doesn't really appear until like the second half.
It's
because they want to spend so much time building up the myth and the legend of him.
It's half a slasher and half a possession story, which is what makes it different from...
What do the good know, except what the bad teach them by their excesses?
Most 80s slasher stuff.
Most...
Because typically they'll, with Freddy Krueger, it just, he teleports into someone's dream and then just cuts them up in a way that's special to them.
With the exception of the second one, which is about...
With the exception of the second one, which is about him slowly but surely making sure this gay teenager turns even gayer.
Likewise, it's similar... There's a similar sort of possession here.
Allow me at least a kiss.
In the Candyman.
The Candyman.
Candyman.
So he's not technically forcing Helen, the main character, to do any of the killings, but he might as well be.
He's sort of...
Do you think that he did them, or do you think that she imagined him doing them while she was doing them?
Is there a difference?
Because they leave that kind of open-ended. So a major plot point is that after the first crime that the ghost frames her for, a baby goes missing.
And then that's the tension, and a lot of the tension in the second half of the movie is
where is this baby, and is there
it.
any chance of saving it? This baby boy.
So it's a possession movie, but at the end of the movie, she resists his possession and decides to goes to save the baby, which is stuck in this funeral pyre or bonfire.
It's a bonfire that looks like a pyre.
And then she's burned to death as she resists Candyman's...
And saves the baby child.
And so
this community comes together and kind of looks on her as like a hero.
And sort of replaces Candyman as like the new urban legend of this neighborhood.
Yeah, like everyone talks about the myth of Helen Lyle, the lady who went crazy and killed a dog and stole a baby.
And at the end of the movie, she becomes sort of a mysterious, vengeful killer who does the same thing. And if you say her name in the mirror, then she shows up and murders you.
Which is interesting because I think that's unrelated to Candyman. I think she's just such a vengeful spirit. So she's not his slave in the afterlife. She's just...
Well, she became like him.
She became like him, but not...
Because she became a similar sort of figure within the community.
Yeah. Except they kind of show her sort of respect at her funeral. Like, the people who knew what happened know that she was the victim in that scenario, even though the official story is that she was just a crazy woman who kidnapped a baby. But the mother of the baby and everyone in this neighborhood, they know that... They sort of look at her as the one who defeated Candyman.
Mm-hmm. And so overall...
What would you say the big theme of the movie is? What is Candyman about in a figurative sense?
It's about the power of stories. It's about urban legends specifically. But
they lightly touch on it that they say that Candyman is sort of a coping mechanism for this community coming to terms with bad things that happen there.
So there's the one scene that I think shows the themes in the original movie is the scene with the... It has a very 90s sort of perspective on crime and the black community and poverty in the black community. Because they show the good blacks and the bad African Americans.
Yeah, you don't want to have a sound file of you saying that.
They show the good people within that community and the bad people within that community, where it's
a very 90s.
It's a very
mindset.
90s attitude where there's the good single mother who's raising the baby, and then there are the criminals and the gang people, and what they do with that is that it's like, oh no, those people are.
Those are the ones you gotta watch out for.
And the scene that illustrates that, what I'm trying to get at before I get too into the LP tax, is that there's these group of local thugs who call themselves the Candyman, and they use that as an excuse to enact violence on their community.
They use the Hook and a similar costume to him so that people will attribute their violence to the legend and the myth.
So
of him.
it's partially about the way that people use stories to cope with the violence,
but also how people can exploit fear.
The way that the narratives that we create perpetuate violence, sometimes within communities.
Yeah.
And there's some ways in which that's very 90s, very sort of Reagan era racial politics. In the sense that it's like...
I wouldn't say the movie is outdated overall, though. It's a product of its time, but...
I'm just saying that there's this one aspect of it. The more racial politics of it are somewhat dated. But everything else...
holds up very
well. I'd say my one complaint with it as a movie is that it starts very slow. And it could have... It
could have had a better hook.
Yeah, it could have had a better hook, and it could have drawn you in more with the first half. But other than that, it's good.
Come on! That was good. Oh.
I will say the music is good. I love
the music. Is great. It sounds like it's by Philip Glass, so it sounds like that really epic song that plays in Grand Theft Auto 4 on the radio.
And if I had one other complaint, is that the movie doesn't look particularly good. It's not very particularly visually impressive.
There's a couple of really cool, very interesting shots, particularly that image of her in the mouth of the Candyman mural.
But compared to the sequel, the next movie that we're going to talk about, this movie was not very visually impressive.
So
with that, I will play the game.
It's a good movie,
and you can talk now.
Okay. Candyman 1, very cool movie, very fascinating and scary performance from Tony Todd. He just really lights up every scene he's in. He plays the character kind of classy and subdued. Compared to how cheesy a lot of 80s and 90s like slasher villains were, which was very interesting. But he still also is just like, he really lights up the screen. As every time he's on screen, you as the audience are also just very fascinated. And
he has a lot of screen presence. He's very.
He just has a lot of charisma.
Our names will be written on 1,000 walls. Our crimes told and retold by our faithful believers. We shall die together in front of their very eyes and give them something to be haunted by. Come with me and be immortal.
Yeah, charismatic. That's a good word for it.
Even though he's also scary as fuck.
And he has a really nice jacket.
It's a really nice jacket. That looks cozy as fuck. That is the warmest jacket.
I mean, I've been in Chicago in winter, and like that
jacket would be a godsend.
It is such a cool place.
That jacket is... He's a ghost with style, and he's also...
a ghost with practicality.
He's pragmatic. He's probably one of the best dressed ghosts in
what did you feel about
Phantoms.
The main villain? Or no, the main lead actress, Virginia Madsen.
I mean, Helen Lyle isn't...
She's our point of view character?
She's our point of view character. I would not really say I was too fascinated by her as a character. I mean, she's kind of unlikable.
She's she definitely takes advantage of her friends and pushes them into scenarios that they're not comfortable with.
Definitely. She can almost manipulate people around her like that, and then she's also just very nosy and doesn't know when to leave well enough alone, because the whole first half of the movie is basically every sign pointing to back off and leave this story alone. Don't chase this. And she's so invested in advancing her career and her education.
And she's so fascinated by this story.
That she just can't back away from it, and so that ultimately leads to being her undoing when she just flat out sees the Candyman for the first time and realizes how.
And I think part of the tension as well in the second half is that she sees these. She doesn't know how to process it because she sees these things that are going on around her. She sees the Candyman, but the skeptic side of her refuses to believe it, even though it's like literally happening.
You are not content with the stories. So I was obliged to come.
So there's like an element of her being kind of like gaslighted by Candyman, where he's putting her through situations where she looks crazier and crazier, just to further manipulate her and get her into his clutches. And I feel like there's a lot of really good horror movies lately that do that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't feel quite like 80s slasher where it's just run and hide. They're playing cat and mouse sort of mentally, because he has a million opportunities to kill her, but he doesn't want to kill her.
But he doesn't want to bring her along to his side.
Exactly. He's trying to corrupt her, which I guess you could say ultimately he does.
In his own way. And she resists him, but sort of becomes like him.
And we see her boobs a bunch of times.
We do.
I ran out of stuff to say, so I defaulted to that.
So
I think there's not a ton of gore in this movie, but somehow the violence is still really disturbing.
Yeah.
Just the way the color of blood they use.
Well,
and
I think also
the amount of it.
The when somebody is killed in this movie, they don't glorify it in the same way
in
that
this like cheesy like gore blood. Bleh, look at this.
It's like we're not like killing like teenagers and teenagers who are having sex here. We're
just brutalizing like people.
families.
Because there's a scene where a mentally challenged boy has his penis cut off with a hook. There's the psychiatrist at the mental health facility is just stabbed in the back and like bleeds out at his desk. Her friend Bernadette is brutally stabbed off screen, and when you see her, she looks like just this puddle, and her skin is like pale white. It doesn't glorify the violence or play it in any way that's kind of reveling in it. Which makes it a little bit more disturbing. It's fascinating. The more you try to have fun with gore, the less it's really shocking. Because, you watch something like Evil Dead, there's tons of gore in that, but it doesn't, like, bother you, because it's, like...
It's played for laughs.
It's playing with it,
It's splatstick.
And then you get a lot less gore in this, but somehow it's a little bit more impacting. It's fascinating.
Fascinating.
Yeah, I would say it wasn't the most terribly visually interesting movie. It was kind of flat and
very like
colorless,
desaturated.
Yeah, visually kind of, and I feel like maybe that was by design.
It was fascinating to see two very different visual depictions of Chicago, because one of them is looking down on Chicago,
kind of portraying it as this disgusting,
and that's
the
night that's another sort of aspect of it that's very 90s, is just Chicago, look at this dumpster place.
But the second movie we watched today had a much more sympathetic view of Chicago and the people in it and the struggles they've had.
So let's move to the second movie. This new movie was co-written and produced by Jordan Peele
of Us and Get Out fame.
I was gonna say Jordan Peele of Jordan Peele fame, but that works too.
Of Key and Peele, he played Debrickashaw Ferguson.
Yes, he did.
That iconic character.
Who?
Debrickashaw Ferguson.
So and
thank
then
God for the Emoji Movie.
No.
Do you know why I'm saying that?
No, I don't.
Because Jordan Peele
I remember
was offered the role of the poop emoji, and he was so offended that he decided to quit comedy and go exclusively into horror.
He was so offended that he didn't get it.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Wow.
Candyman.
And this was directed by somebody called Nia DaCosta, who also co-wrote with Peele and one other person.
Yes.
And she is up-and-comer in Hollywood, and her next film is going to be the Captain Marvel 2.
So anyway, Candyman 2, Electric Boogaloo, or Candyman 4, depending on if you're an asshole.
A spiritual sequel to Candyman.
It's not even really spiritual. It's a direct sequel. They actually have multiple returning cast members.
It's the Halloween 2 of it's the Halloween 2018 of Candyman sequels.
I suppose if you count that they did ignore 2 sequels in between, it kind of is, because it's just, alright, we're going back to the first one, we're making a direct sequel to that, everything in between, screw it. So, but with Halloween it was a little bit more offensive because
the Force
second
Awakens
movie was really
good. Of Candyman sequels.
It's true. All of it. The candy, everything.
It's true. All of it.
So this one is about an artist played by Black Manta / Dr. Manhattan in blackface.
/ Morpheus 2.0.
Time to fly.
Yeah. Who is, he's an artist in, what is
now
the new version of green.
Cabrini
Green.
Which is a gentrified,
like, super fancy, ultra, city instead of a big gross hellhole nightmare housing project
with high rises with like all that glass, and so there's a really fun opening shot. The opening shot of the movie is great. And I really love it.
It's like upside down, so it almost feels like
the tops of the buildings are sort of hidden.
It almost looks like the city is bottomless and has no floor.
The tops of the skyscrapers are like hidden in fog. It's very atmospheric, which sort of tells you right off the bat that this is going to be a very different visual depiction of Chicago. So right from the beginning, it's all like shiny glass cities, fancy loft apartments.
But they do also show the low income.
They show the low income stuff.
But they play that a little bit more sympathetically.
Yeah.
It doesn't look as disgusting and colorless.
A lot
anymore.
more naturalistic, more greens and blues and
more natural lighting.
Instead of being so washed out. The depiction of Chicago, it's much more atmospheric. A lot more of it takes place at night. It very sort of takes advantage of the atmosphere and the location of Chicago to really create a very unique.
Well, because the story of Candyman is the story of the place he's from.
Yeah,
they're inextricably tied together.
But it's also a different place than it was.
It's a different Candyman than it was.
Yeah.
So what the story is essentially about, if we can finally
it's
get
another possession story.
It's another possession story about this 30-something early 30s
Yuppie.
artist man who is trying his best to make it into the art career, like the
he's an
art
up-and-coming
industry.
artist, but he's hit a bit of a dry patch.
Yeah, he hasn't found any inspiration in a while, so he's getting kind of blocked from progressing in his career by a lot of pretentious art people who are typically white and kind of blocking him with sort of racist undertones towards his work, telling him what his work needs to be, and so he starts digging around trying to find inspiration in the low-income housing part of Chicago, where he eventually finds sort of what's left of the original community from the first film. And a guy tells him the story of... a story of Candyman. It's not the original story, but it is a story.
It's a version of what happened in the first movie, but not the same story. It shows within that how the story can evolve and change just between those two movies.
So the details of the Candyman legend are subject to change, but it will continue throughout time.
Mm-hmm.
And so as he discovers that, eventually he starts seeing Candyman. It's like the virus has started again. All it took was one person to start telling someone else, and then he starts telling people. And so
his art starts spreading it.
Because he creates this big fancy art project about it that becomes very big and viral.
After someone
is killed at his art project, because the art project is just a mirror that says "Say Candyman" 5 times.
And he has some paintings inside of it.
And the pretentious art dealer hack guy who's like an asshole to him says it while trying to screw his like much younger his intern. And both of them are brutally murdered by Candyman. And so that just lends credence to the rumor and it popularizes it again. So people completely independent of this artist guy who've never even met him are now getting killed by the Candyman legend, and it started this whole thing all over again. But while that's happening, he's also physically evolving into a new incarnation of Candyman, and we find out that he was the kidnapped baby from the first film, and it's all sort of coming full circle, is that he was supposed to be taken by Candyman and escaped, but it was sort of his destiny,
his homecoming,
to end up there anyway. And so this film changes around the story of it a little bit and depicts Candyman as like a physical manifestation of this community's
intergenerational trauma
from racial violence. So whatever.
So it's established that Tony Todd was one of the Candymen. He was the original,
who were killed in brutal ways from some kind of racial violence.
There's always a new Candyman. There's always a new victim of racial inequality and subjugation. One of the newer ones is established to have been a victim of police brutality. Violence.
Where they so there's a legend of this guy in the 70s with a hook hand who was suspected
just had a prosthetic.
He just had a prosthetic, and he was suspected of giving children candy with razor blades, which he was actually innocent of. But the police still brutally beat him to death anyway, so he becomes a second generation of Candyman.
And then, as the story goes along, Black Manta becomes another.
By design of someone else. So the guy who tells him the legend is trying to weaponize Candyman against the police and against, the people who gentrified the city by creating a big resurgence of the legend. So he told this guy, who eventually sort of spread the story around and brought him back.
And then he became...
And then he turns him into the new version of Candyman so that it really goes big as a story, and so everyone starts talking about it. So he weaponizes the legend, sort of get revenge for racial inequality.
And then at the very end of the movie, which I think really
was really cool.
The ending really shows sort of this movie's creative team's perspective on this story, which is that So at the end of this movie, Black Manta becomes Candyman
after he's killed by the police,
and then his
completely
girlfriend.
Stupid reasons.
His girlfriend is given a lot more screen time than Virginia Madsen's fiance husband is in the original.
We spend a lot more time on their relationship,
and she on her trauma as well, and how she's sort of been a witness to trauma over and over again. And she is arrested by the police because the police find the aftermath of the Candyman and everything, and then they just say they can, and then the police tell her, "Look, you can either agree with us and cover up what really happened and blame your fiancé for everything, or we'll arrest you with him." And then she summons Candyman
as a way to get out of the police custody, because then Candyman just brutally just demolishes this entire.
And it shows how these these stories of intergenerational trauma are not just a cheap way, not just a way of coping, but a way of becoming empowered and powering change, which is kind of what's happened in real life with certain events that I will not mention because I don't want to get too political.
I mean, you could say that, like, there are real people recently who've become very famous for being their own sort of Candymen because of what's happened to them. And how their story empowers some people and frightens others, depending on,
what side they are
what side they're on of the issue.
That's sort of the interesting aspect of this franchise to me, because it was, like I mentioned originally, it was written by Clive Barker, who wrote it as a very sort of English story. He wrote it about Liverpool, the city that he grew up, which is sort of the Pittsburgh of England, roughly.
Translating it into the United States.
Just
really the black experience and culture here.
Yeah, made it
so much more interesting.
But at the same time, I think that this new movie really does a better job of...
Its message is a little bit clearer and more poignant, and I would say a little bit more hard-hitting.
And that's probably partially because it has people like Jordan Peele working on it.
Because he does a lot of very interesting...
And it's made by a team... I think it's written and directed... All the people
behind
the scenes are African-American black.
So they have a better perspective on the experience and what they're trying to say.
And you can tell that there's a lot more empathy for Tiona Paris, the girlfriend's character.
Yes.
Partially also because the director is also a black woman. Like, good for her. Like, getting more those people making movies. I'm down for it.
Yeah, making more terrible Marvel movies that we're all gonna hate.
Thanks, Kevin.
Can't wait to see you make Sam Raimi just quit directing forever, probably.
Like a Garbaldegard? Hit a guy, hit it there.
You can cut all this, I'm just bitching.
I think I like these movies, and I understand what they're about. I'm not sure I would rewatch them a lot.
I might rewatch the second one a couple times, because that one, there was a lot going on
There's one thing I did want to mention as well, is that this... Candyman, the new one, reminds me, and it is the better version of another movie, which is Velvet Buzzsaw, starring Jake Gyllenhaal.
Velvet Buzzsaw sucked ass.
I hated
that movie. It was so boring. Like, we know what the twist is in the first 2 seconds, and then they spend the whole movie pretending it's like a mystery.
They're both movies about the art world, and about creation, and about sort of the way that art is commodified. But adding the element of African-American culture and sort of legends makes it a more interesting story, a more focused story, because
it also had likable characters.
Velvet Buzzsaw is basically a story about you can tell it's written by a director who's bitching about Hollywood.
Yeah.
This movie is a little bit more accessible and a little bit more universal.
Yes.
But it also has that commentary on art and what stories do and what we're supposed to do.
Now, let's talk about the nitty-gritty.
Okay.
The gore was awesome. There was some really fucked up stuff in this. I had to look away because there was a scene with like, a character's hand is rotting, while he's still alive, and his fingernails were falling off. And that was so grotesque, I had to look away. There's a great... All of the scenes where Candyman's just killing people, fantastic. You can only see him in mirrors. They do some really creative stuff where he's invisible to the human eye, but if you look in a mirror, you can see him. And so they do all kinds of cool perspective shit where he's slashing people, but you can't see him unless you're looking at the right part of the screen.
Or there's a great scene early on where there's a couple of, like, the art gallery murders.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of mirrors in this art gallery where you can, like, see him, but you can't see him normally. And they do a lot of fun perspective
He also
stuff with that.
floats now, which is, he, like, floats above the ground, like 2 inches off the ground, just cutting people to pieces, like, way more aggressively.
Yes.
And he feels more ghostly, and they do a lot of really interesting stuff with him, like, choking people and floating them around, and it almost looks like they're being killed by an invisible man.
Yeah, they play with perspective a lot during the...
This movie loves doing really creative stuff with mirrors, which it makes sense.
Which is also why the title cards play reverse.
Oh, yeah. Well, I thought that for just a second, I was like, is this a really artsy decision to make the movie nerve-wracking from the very start? Or did the projectionist up in the room fuck up and put the film in backwards or something? If that's even possible. Because the footage was flipped on all of the production company logos. But then the text in the movie was fine, so I was like, okay, I guess they're just trying to be scary.
It was funny, because I knew that was going to happen.
I saw it and was like, what the... Universe? What? Huh?
If I were to say one complaint about the new one, I would say the music, while it works in the story...
It wasn't nearly as haunting or fascinating
as the original.
The original soundtrack was melancholy and haunting.
It's much more operatic.
And whimsical. It was all kinds of things at the same time, and the new one is just creepy music.
The new one is a lot more sort of ambient music. It's atmospheric.
It just doesn't stick in your head the same
The original
way.
is more operatic. It's more sort of classical instrumentation, instruments.
Well, that's what makes it stand out. The new one, it feels more generic. Like, it has some of the same sort of
beats.
It's inspired by the original, but it doesn't hit as hard.
I was very disappointed until the credits played, because until the credits played, it did not play the Candyman theme from the original.
Yes, eventually it did. So, do we want to spoil the big reveal at the final, like, last 20 seconds of the movie? I mean, we've spoiled just about everything. Tony Todd is in the reboot, and I was very happy about it. I couldn't tell if they digitally de-aged him or if Black Don't Crack, but he looked exactly how he did in the other one.
What they did
looked awesome.
So what they did in that scene is that Tiona Paris summons the Candyman, and he kills all the cops
in the form of her dead boyfriend.
And then she walks around the corner,
and his face is covered in bees.
And then the bees come aside, and he's Tony Todd now.
And then we hear him, and he's super clear on screen, and he just says in this booming, epic voice, "Tell everyone."
And it's basically another expression of the way that this story perpetuates itself through these different vessels.
And it also, like, keeps the continuity of Candyman wants his story to be told so he can continue to exist as a legend. So as long as you keep telling the story, even if the story changes, he'll always be around. And it's really cool. It's really creepy.
And it's like it's like the one character in the laundromat says, Candyman isn't a person, he's the whole damn hive.
It's fantastic. What a good-ass movie. Check out both Candymen. Watch the first one, because it adds some great context to the second.
It has its moments.
The first one has its moments. I think the second one...
The second one kind of blows it out of the water.
Which is a good thing. You want to do that. You want that experience. You want it to get better with each installment.
And I just think, especially visually, aesthetically, it is just so much...
It's just also bloodier.
It's bloodier
in like a still classy way. It's not over the top bloody. It's not fun bloody. It's still disturbing as shit.
I think that because part of it for me is that these movies are about
how black
places.
People age so much better than everyone else. Because goddamn, if the mom did
Vanessa
not look,
Williams,
she looked so good. I could not tell that it's been 30 years. She looked like she's still in her 20s.
But I was saying, these movies are about a place. They're about the sense of place and the way that communities interact with places and spaces.
Inform that
Cabrini
location.
Green, yes. And I think that there was a much stronger sense of place in the second movie.
Yes.
There was, it used Chicago, it used locations in Chicago.
It made Chicago more of a character.
It was very atmospheric, it had a great aesthetic to it, and the visuals, the cinematography was just gorgeous. The original movie is a bit more flat, and there's like stuff like the apartments where you're like, that was a set.
Yeah.
There's nothing in this movie that feels like a set.
There's nothing in this movie that feels artificial.
It feels like real places. It's very grounded in locations, but it also has its own aesthetic to it. I really like movies that create their own sense of space and place and location and have their own visual aesthetic, and they did that. They did that a lot more strongly in here, and versus the other movie where it's just white, bright. Here's these same 2 helicopter shots we're going to recycle 4 times. Here's Tony Todd in a jacket,
standing
in a parking
way far
lot.
from you in a parking garage that's blown out in white because they just the skies behind it.
Ugly, that movie. A lot of
visually, yes, it's kind of but also
the only difference that I will say is that the original movie has real bees.
Oh, yes, they actually have real bees, and you can definitely tell that they're real bees. The new one keeps using fake CGI bees, and they look like little cartoon bees. Do you remember when Tony Todd and Virginia Madsen, is that her name?
Mm-hmm.
Both have real bees coming out of their eyes and face and noses, and they're making out with bees all over them, and somehow neither of them are getting stung. That was visually very hard to look at, that because you just imagine
you can tell that was real.
Yeah, it's that there's so much visual texture to that. Just the doing that practically was just so much more shocking, and so all the bee stuff, all the imagery of bees in this one, just like I could tell it was a CGI bee, so it just didn't bother me, and I kind of started to forget.
It didn't distract.
But it just wasn't as memorable.
Yeah. So,
that's interesting. Is that the original wins in the regard of doing things practically, at the very least.
So I was thinking about this as well. How it's funny to compare this horror movie, Candyman, and the Jordan Peele sort of oeuvre of cinema and films, and compare that to something like, for example, The Night House, which you watched last week, and let's say a lot of the indie horror movies that star white people
are about depression.
They're all about
and sadness,
depression,
and living in a big empty apartment by yourself,
and how you're that's not fulfilling,
and you're haunted by your childhood trauma because your dad was an asshole,
or you're haunted by your ex,
or your shitty ex-boyfriend,
or how this cult of white people is an expression of your
failing relationship,
and then
all the more black-oriented horror movies are just about the fear
they're all about systemic oppression.
So the white people horror movies are about depression, and the black people horror movies are about oppression.
You really saved that for this review.
I did, because it was such a good bit. I knew that we had to say it. But that's a good thing. That I don't know. I enjoy both perspectives. I mean, it's what hits close to home for both of those communities. I'm not exactly. I don't have much color in me, but I come from a very multiracial family. We need
both of those perspectives when talking about horror, because horror can be used to address a lot of issues.
Horror reflects the issues and opinions and struggles of the time, whenever that time is, and that changes. You know, it could be fear of a nuclear Armageddon in the 80s. It could be fear of, the over-industrialization and sort of commercialization of the world with like the zombie movies of the 70s.
Or maybe it's just about how people having a hook shoved in your hand is spooky.
Or sometimes it's about nothing at all, and it's just like, Hey, you know what? I want to see a dude in a hockey mask just cut the heads off of a bunch of horny people. I don't know what social issues that one's really talking about.
The villain is an expression of your internalized gayness that you're rejecting.
A third-degree burn victim in a really unfashionable sweater telling you to just admit that you're gay.